Hey, 20%. I hope you guys are doing great. I hope you guys have had a good week so far. I just have a really short thing, something that I've been processing myself. Um, you could say over the last 20 years, but really just the last couple of days in particular, trying to draw down on an idea. So I know that in my life, when I don't see the results that I want to see. And I'm not just talking about like accomplishing things as a leader. I'm not talking about just kind of becoming, better at whatever I'm doing. I mean, even in my walk of faith, like when I'm not seeing the things that I want to see, when I see myself slipping, or when I see myself, weak in terms of temptation and that kind of thing, what I have learned to sort of double down on is an idea that I didn't understand early in my faith. Early in my faith, I assumed that I wasn't trying hard enough. Early in my faith, I assumed that if I made a mistake, if I spoke harshly, if I didn't show kindness, if I didn't have peace, this was because I wasn't doing something right. And I think there's a temptation sometimes. And I know we emerge out of a holiness tradition in the Church of God. And so there's always this temptation to say, okay, if I'm not trying hard enough, then I'm not going to get it right. I've got to knuckle up, I've got to grit my teeth, and I've got to do better. The older I get and the more steeped I think I am in the scriptures, the less I believe that that's true. I don't believe that's true at all, in fact. In Galatians 5, and I'll just read the passage because I want to start there. But in Galatians 5, there's this really beautiful passage that most of us are really familiar with. And so in verse 16, the Bible says, Paul is speaking to the Galatian church, and he says, I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh, right? So then you skip down to verse 22 in the passage that so many of us know. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self control. Against such things there is no law, and those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires, right? And so what is so neat to me about that passage is not just the list of things: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self control. What is so neat to me is that God intentionally, through the inspired pen of the Apostle Paul, calls it fruit. And immediately when he calls it fruit, it creates a whole different dynamic. What he does not say is these are behavioral characteristics that you have to fight for constantly. What he does say is these are the results of what happens when you tend the soil well and you allow the Holy Spirit to be in control of the field of your life. Because it's fruit. It's something that grows. It's something that is organically produced when seed and soil are both healthy and are given the time to create and accomplish what they were designed to create and accomplish. And I think so. So oftentimes, one of the things the enemy does, and if you're in leadership, you feel pressure and weight, and if you're not in leadership, which you guys on this message are, but even if you're not, I think if you're trying to live the life of a believer, then there's always this temptation to see your failures, your stumbles, your mistakes, when you don't get it all right. There's always this temptation to see that as a moment when you've got to buckle down. Why didn't I say no to the thing I need? Like all those kind of things. When in reality, what the Bible seems to say is that the mature Christian life is not one of white knuckling your righteousness, and it's not a teeth gritted holiness. It is really the comfort that comes from knowing that if I continue to allow the Spirit of God to clear the soil of my life, then the seed of the gospel will naturally produce the things that I actually have need of. And so when I find myself not doing the things that I'm supposed to do, then the answer is not, how can I try harder? The answer is, how can I make the field more healthy? I want you to let it sink in. How healthy is your field? How healthy is your soil? How healthy is the place where the fruit is supposed to be growing into maturity? This is the question of our life. And so there's something that I'd read. There's actually two things that we understand about soil. Now, I'm not a farmer. I can't grow anything, but I can read a lot of articles about agricultural stuff. So I've got that going for me. But there's these two ideas. So, and both of them are very biblical principles. Both of them reach back into a biblical idea and an Old Testament command center where God tells his people, when you come into the land that you're going to stay in, every 7 years, right? You let the land rest. The resting of the land is a huge part of the production of healthy fruit. So what we know is that if you let land rest periodically, it will absolutely produce more crops and greater harvest in more efficient ways than if you ran it right to the edge. If you never let the soil rest, you will find that the growth is stunted, that the growth is not as healthy, that the harvest is not as plentiful. But when you allow it to rest, what you find out is that the rest actually creates a replenishing of the things in the soil that create great harvest. And so obviously this is not hard to apply, right? In this season, especially maybe in Advent and Christmas season, there's 150,000 things to do. We're busy, we're running around, but I think there's got to be a discipline in us to rest the soil. If you're not seeing the fruit of the Spirit in your life like you want to, stop gripping your hands so tightly and start seeing if you're letting the soil rest. Because good soil will always produce good fruit. The problem is not the seed and the problem is not the fruit. The problem is always the soil if we're not seeing the growth that we want to see. So are we resting the soil of our life? Are we allowing the nutrients that can only come through rest and Sabbath to actually take hold of our life? This is one of the questions I have. So I think there's this other side of this too, and I'm not going to go in depth. This is a shorter one this week. I've got things to do this afternoon, but I wanted to share this because I just, and maybe it's just revolutionary for me, but to come back to this moment and say, when I'm not getting it right, it is not a question of whether I can work harder. It is a question of whether I can rest better. It's a question of whether I can submit better. It's not a question of how can I redo or undo or overdo. It's a question of how can I let what Christ has done be sufficient in my life. It's a counterintuitive move, but it's a powerful idea, and it changes the way that we actually become holy. It changes the way that we walk in righteousness. If we rest the soil, if we let Jesus be Jesus, and there are times when we just step back and say, I'm not going to do any more on this. I'm not going to work any harder on this. I'm not going to spend another 3 hours on this. I'm going to step back and let him be sufficient. It seems like we're on the cliff's edge because if we're not getting it done, it ain't going to get done. Like, I realize that. And we live in a hustle culture too. We live in a culture that says if you're not working harder than everybody else, then you're never going to ascend to the heights of success. The problem with that is that it doesn't apply and it doesn't scale to your spirit. Because your spirit is more like soil than it is like a capitalistic economy. Your spirit is more like a field than it is an American structure. Your spirit cannot thrive in hustle culture. Your spirit needs stillness, and your spirit needs quiet, and your spirit needs rest in order to produce the fruit of the Spirit, which is really what sets you apart from everyone else. It's what sets me apart from everyone else. Anybody can sit at this desk. Anybody can do this work. Almost anybody could study the Bible. Almost anybody could stand up and say things about the scriptures. Like, all the things that I do can be replicated. The thing that cannot be replicated, the thing that is uniquely Chris, is the way that God can take the soil of my life and produce the fruit of his Spirit through me in the areas where I actually live, on the pathways where I actually walk. That is something that cannot be counterfeited. That is something that cannot be replaced. That is where I'm truly unique in this world. That's truly where the transformation of God in your life actually takes hold, where you actually are. Not the things you can work for, but the things that can be produced in you through the power of the Spirit of God. And I think, so that doesn't mean that we don't work, right? But it means that we have to know when it's time to say, I'm not going to work right up to the edge of exhaustion. I'm going to choose to allow the Spirit of God to do some things. So there's the second piece too. So letting the soil rest, or letting the field rest, is a very biblical concept, and it's very much proven scientifically. But there's this other thing that I think is so neat. So instead of just sitting still all the time, because I think that's, if we hear that with this, like, what do I just go watch TV? Like, do I watch Sports Center again? Like, am I just going to watch some more Hallmark movies? Can I just tell you, don't? Oh God, don't watch any more Hallmark movies. Please do not. What is neat about soil is that it's not just letting it rest that actually creates more productivity, but it's planting cover crops. You can look this up, and this is fascinating. I'm not going to get into this in depth, but I think this is interesting. Cover crops are types of plants that are planted in the soil that is resting, that actually creates coverage. It eliminates erosion. So you need some kind of something in the soil, or else wind and rain will rut the soil or will blow away the topsoil. Like, so you need something to hold on to it. But these plants actually create and allow and promote the kind of nutrient, the replenishment of the nutrients in the soil that's needed. So when you actually plant then the cash crops, when you plant the things that you want to harvest in the next season, that soil is better because the cover crop was there. The cover crop was there. I want you to get that image and those words in your mind. I just want you to tell yourself, I need a cover crop. I don't just need to sit around in a blank room thinking, God, when are you going to produce fruit? Like, that's not what this is. You need a cover crop in your life. And so that means that you need some kind of hobby. You need some kind of outlet. You need actual friends. You need friends who don't depend on you to be everything for them. In leadership, and this is where this is unique to this, in leadership, there is always the temptation to need people in your life to lead in order to be a leader. The problem is that if you need them, or you can't lead them if you need them as those support structures in your life. You need some people who you're not leading, who you're just friends with. Doesn't mean you don't influence them. It doesn't mean that they're not important to you. It doesn't mean that they don't share with you and help you. It doesn't mean you don't help them. What it means is that you have some people in your life who are just there. And if your leadership position were to come to an end, those people are still going to be there. That's cover crop. You need some things, some activities, some hobbies in your life. You need to read books, or you need to have something like, if you like to bird watch, I don't know what you do, but some people collect stamps. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, it's like, how in the world is that a normal thing? But some people do, and they find great value in that. They love it because it's an outlet. And I think a lot of times the things that hustle culture looks at and says, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for, I got to work. I got to get another job. I don't have time for hobbies. I don't have time to build models. I don't have time to put ships in bottles. Like, I don't have time for all that mess. Y'all just have all this time on your hands. What I think is interesting about the Bible's way of teaching us what produces best harvest is the Bible seems to say, if you don't have those kind of things in your life, then you're never actually going to maximize the harvest of your life. Which, if we pull that into New Testament terms from Galatians chapter 5, if there's no cover crop in your life, then you're not going to find the fruit of the Spirit in the power and in the amount and in the importance that it's supposed to be inside of you. Cover crops are important to the soil because they keep it from eroding. If you just go sit in a blank room and say, God, I'm on a Sabbath and I'm going to sit here for 8 hours today, then you're going to find out that your energy erodes. You're going to find out that you have a much worse outlook on life than you did before you went in. And then you're going to blame God and say, well, I tried to rest. I tried to take a day off, God. That's not what a cover crop is. Resting the soil goes hand in hand with the cover crop because we're resting it from productivity, not from growth. So you've got to do something that grows you without, but also something that doesn't hold the same pressure as the harvest that your life is trying to produce. And in that moment, what happens is the nutrients of your spirit begin to grow more vibrant and potent, which means that when you come back to the places of performance and effort, you find out that you're growing that fruit at a faster rate. And so if I can just circle back around and finish this, what I'm finding now in my life at 46, what I'm finding now after walking with the Lord 22, 23 years, whatever it is that when I find myself falling down a lot, when I find myself making a lot of mistakes, I've stopped looking at my effort as the source of replenishment. I've stopped looking at my performance as the thing that's going to save me. And I've sort of come back to the place where in prayer, I'll just come very honestly before God. Can I just tell you too, even as a leader, you can come before God honestly about your failures. God knows that you failed. God knows that you stumbled. God knows you didn't do it right. You need to come before him honestly. You need to come before him and say, this is what I did wrong. I know this is what I did wrong. And now, God, help me understand how I wasn't allowing the soil of my life to produce the fruit of the Spirit, which led me into a place where I served the flesh instead of serving the King. I just think that's such a crucial thing. If you ever want to mature in your faith beyond fear-based performance, which is what a lot of us grew up with. which is what a lot of us still live with. Fear-based performance. If I get it wrong, God's going to look to smite me somehow. If I get it wrong and I don't immediately pray, then God's so angry with me that his burning wrath is going to come launching out of heaven in fireballs and lightning bolts. I've got to feel beaten to death every time I make a mistake. No. I think backing up and zooming out and saying, okay, what was I doing? What were the patterns of my life looking like that did not allow the fruit of the Spirit to be produced in me? Because if the fruit of the Spirit was being produced in me, then I would not have served the momentary desire that I had. I would not have served that impatience. I would not have served that lust. I would not have served that irritation. I would not have served that stress. I would have served the Spirit in those moments instead. So what is it about the soil of my life that was stunting the harvest of the fruit of the Spirit? It's a much better question. And what it does is it takes the pressure off of you in the moment, and it works back upstream to say, not just how can I get better right now, but how can I be better season after season after season? How can I rest the soil appropriately, and how can I plant the cover crops that are going to be healthy for me so that I can produce the fruit of the Spirit in season and out of season as a leader? Again, that's part of what Paul tells Timothy. He says you need to be ready in season and out of season. That means that some seasons you're not producing visible fruit, but you're growing deeper roots. And in some seasons, you're flourishing in the fruit that the entire world is partaking of. This is the power of what happens when we stop acting like in season and out of season. It means that you have to be ready to preach all the time. That's not at all what that text means. That's a terrible interpretation of that passage. What it means is that sometimes you're letting the soil rest so the roots can get down deeper and pull the nutrients up from the depths of the riches of the treasures of God. And then in those seasons beyond that, you're producing this enormous harvest. Jesus says 30, 60, or even 100-fold. Like, this is the power of what happens when God is at the helm instead of us. And this is also the power of what happens when we stop making our success out to be the result of our performance, and instead we start seeing our true success in the Spirit as the fruit that is produced when we allow our soil to be healthy. So I want to share, that's a little bit more abstract, it's a little bit higher level, but man, I think it is a game changer when it comes to maturing in the faith in the way that we're created to mature. So I hope that helps you. I love you all. I'm praying for you all. I'm just so grateful for you guys in this season. I'm so thankful for all of you. And I do hope that this Christmas season is fantastic for you all. Blessings.